2015 report on status of women and girls in Maine wrote, economic security for aging women in Maine would have to start with livable wage jobs earlier in life. Hence, minimum wage is an issue for women from 20 to when they hopefully have some kind of retirement. So is minimum wage an important discussion to have locally, statewide, nationally? You betcha. And I want to thank Joe Baldacci for bringing it to the forum. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. We're going to have Todd Gabe, who is a University of Maine economist, speak next. I want people to know that once the speeches are done, we're going to be having it opened up for people's questions or comments, and the panel will respond. So Todd, you've done some studying on the local labor statistics, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me. Looks like we have a good crowd. Like Jane, I have a lot of numbers that I want to share, and also from my perspective, I don't have a position for or against the proposal. Coming from the university, I'm really here to provide some objective information on the local labor market, and then at the end, I'm going to talk about some work we're doing looking at the whole U.S., not just the Bangor area. So I have some information on wages for jobs in the Bangor metro area, as well as information on the types of occupations that are more likely to pay lower wages. And I guess I'll start here. So if you look at the kind of the distribution of wages in the Bangor area, the 10th percentile wage is $8.75. So that means 10% of the local workers are making that amount or less. Believe it or not, that number is actually pretty close to the number for the U.S. as a whole. For the whole United States, the 10th percentile wage is just about $8.80. So it's pretty comparable. When you go up to the 25th percentile, so that's the first quartile, Bangor and the U.S. as a whole, the numbers are fairly comparable. Where you begin to see a divergence, a greater divergence, is when you get up to the very, very higher wage categories. To give you an example, the 90th percentile wage in Bangor, so that would mean 90% would make less than this, so only a tenth, 1 out of 10 would make more than this, is $34 in Bangor. And nationally, that number is $43. So we're down to about 80%. So just kind of give you a sense of how Bangor compares to the rest of the country. In terms of low wages, we're somewhat similar in the percentiles. As you get farther up the wage distribution, there's a greater discrepancy. Now that's looking at all types of occupations, but there's a lot of variation in different types of jobs. And the numbers I'm going to talk about are for fairly broad occupational categories. If you really want to get down in the weeds, the government tracks 700 to 800 specific job titles. You could get really, really specific in the type of occupation. I'm going to talk about broader occupation categories. So there would be a broad category, for example, would be executives. That's a fairly broad category. Within that, there'd be a lot of different specific types of jobs. Again, there's a wide range in earnings across occupations, as you all can imagine. For an occupation group like sales, so these would be retail type jobs, food preparation and serving, so these would be a lot of restaurant workers, people that work in what's called billing, cleaning and maintenance, janitorial work, and some maintenance type work. Those tend to be the lowest occupations in terms of wages. And if you look at the 10th percentile in something like sales, it's just a little over $8.09. So again, that means about 10% of your retail sales workers, their hourly wage is less than $8.10. So I took this information and kind of ran some scenarios. I know the proposal, one is to raise the minimum wage to $8.25, and then a year out it would go to $9, and then a year from then it would go to $9.75. So I thought I would just kind of, and this is looking at people's wages. When I say today, it's actually data from 2014. This data is updated every year in May. So I've got the May 2014 data. In a few months, we have the May 2015 data. But I think the numbers that were from 14 would be pretty similar to what we have today. So if we were to raise the minimum wage to $8.25, what percentage of the workers do you think it would impact in the Bangor area? Any guesses? 30%? Not quite 30. Just under 10, about 7%. And so about 7% of the workers in the Bangor area would see their wages go up. It would be a much higher number for people that work in restaurants, for people that work in areas like retail sales. About 20% of the restaurant workers would see their wages increase. About 14% of people in sales, about 12% in personal care, personal service workers, and about 11% in buildings, cleaning, maintenance, those types of jobs. So now let's see what would happen if we raised the minimum wage to $9. So that would be like 2 years out by your state proposal. How many people do you think that would impact? More than 7%.
15%.
Close, at 12%. 12%. The number there would be very high in some of the occupations I've talked about. About 44% of your food prep and serving type occupations. About 30% of the people that work in retail sales. About a quarter of the workers in these other two occupational groups I've talked about. So your personal care and services and your building and grounds cleaning and maintenance. So now let's move up to $9.75. So that's the proposal, and at the end, 3 years out. Any guesses? So we went from 7 to what was it? 12. 18%. So, and actually, if you look at the 10th percentile wage in Bangor and the quartile, so that's the 25th percent, the $9.75 falls right in the middle. So this was a fairly easy calculation, even for me. So that would affect about 18% of all workers, over 50% of the employees in these food preparation and services, about 40% of the workers in sales, close to 40 in those other categories. So what this means is that if we were to try to raise the minimum wage up to $9.75, there would be a pretty large impact on the workforce as a whole. Again, about 18%. But there would be some types of occupations where you can see upwards of half the workers would see their wages go up. And I guess I'll talk about that more at the end, or talk about that a little bit more. Now I wanted to move to the other thing I wanted to talk about. And this is looking at information for the whole United States, not just Bangor. I'm working on a project with some researchers. One's at a Federal Reserve Bank, and one is an economist at a research center up in Florida. And we are looking at how people transition out of low-paying jobs into better jobs. So you might have heard the argument, well, if you don't like your low-paying job, just find a better job, right? So for that, we identified to do this type of analysis, you can't just focus on a single place because you need lots of data, you need lots of information. So here we look at people in the U.S. as a whole, the whole labor market, that are in occupations that have median wages of less than $12. So those would be a lot of the same types of jobs that I was talking about earlier. So your low wage jobs. And about 30% of the U.S. workforce are in jobs that have that median wage or lower. So again, your low wage jobs. What percentage of people in those low wage jobs, if you give them a year's time, what percentage do you think would transition into a better paying job? By better, I mean not just another low wage job, but something that's maybe paying, instead of having a median wage of $12, maybe $15, $18. Any guesses? 2%? Are you looking at my notes? You're very close. Anybody think it's, so does anybody think it's easy? Would anybody say, oh, half of those workers or a quarter? Would anybody think it would be really easy to move up? 2% is almost just right on target. So if you look at people in these low-wage jobs, if you go a year out, about 3/4, or about 75%, are in the same occupation. So they're doing the same, doesn't mean they have the exact same job. They could have moved from one employer to another, but they had the same occupation. So again, about 3/4. About 11% are out of the labor force. About 7% are unemployed. About 5% are in a different occupation, but another, like a different occupation that's still a low-wage occupation. About 1.5% are in a different occupation that pays just a little better. And as Jim mentioned, 1.7%, so close to your 2%, we can round up to your 2%, are in a different job that's paying significantly more. So I think that, when you look at these issues, there are a lot of things you need to keep in mind, and I think one is that it's not easy, and actually just these numbers are preliminary in the sense that we're starting a larger project on this. We're trying to look at what are the factors that actually help people move into better jobs. Is it conditions of the local labor market? A lot of it are your own personal characteristics, your background, your education. It could be tied into age. It could be tied into gender. There could be a lot of factors that we're going to study. And my colleague at one of my two colleagues on this is really interested in looking at the types of occupations that are better paying jobs that people are more likely to transition into. So, if you can identify what kinds of jobs, will help people and move up the earnings ladder. So those are things that we're working on, and we'll hopefully have an answer to at a later date. So just kind of summarize, I didn't come here with a position for or against the proposals around the minimum wage. I guess I can share with you that about 1 out of 14 workers in the Bangor area make less than $8.25 an hour, so they would be impacted by the current proposal. About 1 out of 8 makes less than $9, and about 1 out of 6 makes less than $9.75. So I guess if you just think about this room, 1 out of 6 would probably be the first 3 rows, maybe? How many rows do we have? 3, 6, 9. So maybe the first 2 rows. Just to kind of put it into perspective. When you talk about things like raising the minimum wage, there are trade-offs that economists have studied. You have higher wages for people that that are below that threshold. There are studies that show that when you raise the minimum wage, it contributes to unemployment in some of those occupations. If you were to tell employers we're raising the minimum wage to a certain level, and if it's affecting large percentages of their workers, the research is mixed in that some economic studies find that there's little impact on unemployment. There's some that do find impacts. The ones that tend to find impacts find that it does impact those lower wage occupations, as you would imagine. So, there are trade-offs between wages and unemployment. There's trade-offs in terms of the distribution of hours that people get. There's a school of thought that there are businesses that like the idea that they pay a higher wage than their competitors. So there are businesses that have it as almost a competitive advantage that they pay higher wages. The idea around that is you cut down on the cost of finding new workers, of training workers, it lowers absenteeism. So there are companies that will on their own, even without raising the minimum wage, will choose to offer a higher wage. So of course, if you increase the minimum wage, then those businesses would likely want to raise their wages. wages even higher. So it's certainly a complex issue. And then I guess kind of the final thing is just that last bit of the research we're doing for the whole U.S. You know, there are fairly small percentages of people that transition out of low-wage jobs into these higher-paying jobs. So that's something you always kind of have to kind of keep in the back of your mind when you're thinking about these policies. And I guess that's all I have for now, and maybe we'll have some questions later.
Thank you, Todd. Todd is also an expert in the analysis of occupations and industries, so I want to thank him very much. He is a recent award winner of the University of Maine Presidential Public Service Award in 2004. And I appreciate the work that you're doing. Thanks, Todd. Christy Daggett from the Maine Center for Economic Policy is going to give us a little bit of an update of what's happening in Augusta, because all of us often ask, what is happening in Augusta? Could you enlighten us?
Certainly. Thank you, Joe, and thanks for having me here today. It's nice to be in Bangor. I did drive up from Augusta today, and at ESEP, we represent the interests of working Mainers with policymakers in Maine. So we are unequivocally in support of raising the minimum wage, in support of the policy that's being proposed here in Bangor, because, lift your sign up there in the back, because we believe that no working Mainer should live in poverty. And because we know that economic data shows that there's a spillover effect, that the considerable percentage of low-wage workers in Maine would benefit if the minimum wage were raised. So we think it's a great policy for the economy. We think it's great for everyone. We think it's great for, as Mr. Wellehan touched upon, the amount of taxpayer expenditures on welfare programs that right now are subsidizing large, low-wage employers. We just think it's a win-win-win. So, that said, there's a lot of initiatives aimed at raising the minimum wage in the legislature this session. And I've attended the committee hearings on them, and MESEP has testified. And there's a lot of momentum. I can tell you that, you know, people have come from all across the state, waitresses from Farmington and small business owners from the coast, and they've testified on what increasing the minimum wage would mean to them. And it's meaningful and it's moving testimony. On the flip side, there is a class of professional lobbyists who are opponents of raising the minimum wage. So the battle that these supporters of an increase in the minimum wage have is a substantial one. That said, this isn't the only municipal level initiative in the nation. I quickly looked it up before I came up here, and right now there's legislation or initiatives pending in Colorado, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Delaware, California, Washington, Oregon, and in the not very much of a progressive hotbed, Lexington, Kentucky. So there's a lot of good stuff going on. So here at MESEP, we think this is an example of good policy. We think the problem with the economy, both at the state and the national level, is not that American businesses are making insufficient profits. It's that wages have stagnated for the median wage earners since the 1980s, and for the lowest wage earners in Maine, they've actually fallen behind since 2000. So with that, good luck to you with your initiative, and I guess I'll hand it over to Joe and he'll take questions.
I would just like to note a couple of people you might not. This gentleman right here, you might know Don Cookson. You want to just, who's been helping us with the audio. I want to recognize Don's efforts. And Andy Parkinson is helping with the video. Thank you, Andy. And my brother John, who's here, just making sure that I'm doing the minding my P's and Q's. Is that correct? Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. I would now open it up to questions, and everybody on the panel, or anybody would be happy to try to answer the questions that people might have. Yeah, thank you. It's a very modest and quiet crowd here. Come forward, if you don't mind, just come to the microphone.
There's a number of proposals in the state legislature right now to raise the minimum wage. I think 4 or 5 different pieces of legislation.
Yeah.
What's the likelihood that that's going to come together and coalesce around one thing that's going to help everybody in the state of Maine?
That's a very good question. I think, Christy, do you want to, because you're more focusing on the Augusta issues.
Absolutely. That's a good question. I think at first, proponents of the minimum wage increase thought the odds were pretty steep, given the composition of the State House right now. But initiatives like these municipal level initiatives, like what happened in Portland earlier,